And again, I'm Lucy Bloom, Executive Director of Veronica's Voice. Welcome to this Rotary Swarm webinar on policy reforms. I'm going to turn this over to Ashley Chapman, who is our facilitator today.
Thank you, Lucy, and welcome everyone. So we're excited to dive into today's very important conversation on reforms in the great state of Kansas. And so as a human rights lawyer, when I talk to citizens or states or communities about reforms, some of us might kind of go, that's for the legislators, that's for the lawyers, that's not for me. But listen, reforms could not be more important. In fact, if we're working to prevent trafficking, working to identify trafficking in our communities, working to serve victims and survivors, and we keep running into barriers, which is always the case, those barriers are the things that we are trying to reform in our communities. And so as you're leaning into this work, maybe you're already fully engaged. When you see something that's broken in our laws, our policies, our systems, the thing I want you to hear today, and which I hope you hear from all of our speakers as well, is that you can make a difference in that. Sometimes it's a matter of flagging that, to those in your organization. Sometimes it's a matter of calling those in a position to change those things in your state or your communities. But today we're going to hear from a wide range of those who are working on reforms in Kansas, working on reforms nationally, and we can't wait to dive in. So the way we're going to roll is we're going to ask each of our speakers to spend about a few minutes introducing themselves, talking about their work on this very important topic, their perspective on things that are going very well and things that still need to change, especially in the state of Kansas, and then how you can engage and join that fight. So welcome to all our speakers. And the very first one that we're going to ask to come to the table today is Miss Rebecca Zipkin, Policy Director at World Without Exploitation. So Rebecca, welcome, and I'm going to hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you for having me here today. It's great to be with you all in Kansas virtually from Connecticut. I am the Policy Director at World Without Exploitation. We are the largest national coalition fighting human trafficking and sexual exploitation in the United States. We have over 200 member organizations. And World We was created in order to bring organizations from around the country doing such important work to fight sex trafficking together. What we know is that the vast majority of organizations doing this important work are direct service providers, actually working with victims and survivors every day to provide services. And what that means is that they are mostly not able to, don't have the bandwidth to engage in advocacy and policy work in the way that they want to. There's not the funding, there's not the time, there's not the staff. And so World We tries to assist local organizations and states around the country in doing that policy and advocacy work. And we also work very closely with survivors of sex trafficking. We have an executive committee made of all survivors, and every policy that we support or advocate for is always backed by survivors who have directly lived this experience and are telling us this is the policy that we support because we have the experience of living this life and having been exploited in this way. So that's my background. I started out as a sex trafficking prosecutor. So I do also have a law enforcement background. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about policies in this country that address the systems of prostitution, that address the sex trade and how that is linked to sex trafficking. I think most people in the room know definition, but I'm going to give a quick definition of what we see at World Without Exploitation as sex trafficking. The global sex trade is an on and offline multi-billion-dollar industry. Every dollar of profit is fueled by human pain. Sex trafficking is a form of exploitation where people are bought and sold for pleasure and profit, utilizing force, fraud, coercion, and abuse of power, position of vulnerability. And we see that last part as really important, that it's not just that force, fraud, and coercion that we so often hear about when talking about legal definitions of sex trafficking, but it's also the abuse of power and position of vulnerability and abuse of that power and taking advantage of that vulnerability. And so it's also very important to remember that sex trafficking is the vehicle, but prostitution and the sex trade, that's the destination. That's where the exploitation is actually occurring. So what we're working on at World Without Exploitation, for the most part nationally right now, is in states around the country moving towards recognizing that people who are exploited in the sex trade, people who are being bought and sold in prostitution, are victims of gender-based violence, are victims of exploitation, and are not criminals. That arresting and criminalizing people who have been exploited is not the answer to fighting sex trafficking. We know that, other crimes, when someone is a victim of domestic violence or another form of gender-based violence, we are not arresting them, right? We are offering services and support and exit strategies. So the sex trade should be addressed in the same way. And so the overall framework that we support is called the equality model in this country. In other countries, it's often referred to as the Nordic model, or some people might call it partial decriminalization. And what this means is that people who are bought and sold in the sex trade are not arrested, are not criminalized, but are offered exit strategies and support services. While those who are exploiting, including sex buyers, third-party exploiters such as pimps, those who promote prostitution, people who operate brothels, houses of prostitution, and other places where exploitation is occurring, that those folks are held accountable through criminal penalties. And those penalties can sometimes include monetary penalties. It could include jail time. It varies state by state and based on the level of whether something is considered a misdemeanor or a felony. But that is overall what the equality model is. And so that is a policy that we hope states around the country will move towards. Right now, all 50 states in the US, prostitution is criminal. So both those being bought and sold, selling sex is a crime, and buying sex is a crime in all 50 states, other than a few counties in Nevada where there is legalized prostitution. There are legal brothels in a few counties in Nevada. In every other state, prostitution is fully criminalized. In certain countries around the world, they have moved towards a different model from full criminalization. They've moved towards what I was just speaking about, the equality model. And so in those countries, we see it in Norway, Iceland, Canada, France, Sweden, in many other countries now, Ireland. The people who are being exploited are no longer arrested, but they continue to hold exploiters accountable. And the country has really invested in offering exit strategies and services to those who are being exploited rather than arrest and jail and criminalization. And so that is what we believe the path forward is in the United States. There are certain states that are moving in that direction. Certain states are more ready and certain states are less ready, I think, for fully extracting criminal justice interaction. There are many steps to take to get there. It's important, I think in a state like Kansas, it's important that your local jurisdictions think about diversion programs if they don't have them in place, human trafficking specific courts where people can go to receive services instead of a criminal record. There are a lot of steps to move towards this idea of not criminalizing those who are being exploited. So I think that Kansas is in a good place to move towards that because of the great service providers you have and the people providing services to trafficking survivors. That's the number one necessary thing. There has to be buy-in.
Four-wheel drive, then turn left on the four-wheel drive.
There has to be buy-in from the government, and there has to be funding for those service providers in order to make sure that those who are being exploited receive the services that they need.
Yes, thank you so much, Rebecca, for that. I have a couple of follow-up questions to that then. So thank you for your work, across the nation, first of all, and around the world to really start to support victims and survivors of trafficking, whereas most of our communities have been charging them as though they are volitional actors, in this type of commercial sexual exploitation. So it's a mind shift, it's a legal shift, it's a policy shift, it's a practice shift, and that has to go alongside with the services and advocates available to make that happen. Of course, from your perspective, Rebecca, what's the biggest challenge right now in trying to have this conversation nationally?
I think that the biggest challenge is very different in different states, actually. I mean, what we're seeing in many cities across the nation right now is a move towards defund the police, no law enforcement involvement in anything. And so there are certain cities around the country and states where our job at World We right now is we're fighting back against those who want to fully decriminalize the sex trade. And that actually takes a lot of my time up, is fighting back to explain and educate to legislators that full decriminalization would lead to a huge boom in exploitation and sex trafficking. Whereas then there are other states, where I think more of the struggle is convincing law enforcement that we don't need to criminalize and arrest those who are being exploited and victimized in order to prosecute sex trafficking, that there are a lot of more creative ways to be able to arrest and prosecute traffickers than arresting and putting through the criminal justice system someone who is a victim. So I think that the struggle is real, but it's very different depending on where you are. But those are kind of the two areas that we sort of get pushed back in.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rebecca. So I hope all those in a position on this call listening in now or later are hearing from Rebecca that this is not a simple, keep things as is and just find ways to work it out, or just completely swing around across the other pendulum. This is nuanced, it's complex. It requires partners who know how to coach you on what's the best language to include in your laws and policies and changes and new court systems and new diversion programs and support services. Lucy, I'd like to call on you for a moment, please, to share, because I know Veronica's Voice is spearheading some of those programs right now. I think now's a good time to mention those.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a recovery home in Kansas City, Kansas, but we also have classes that are specific for persons who are recovering from commercial sexual exploitation. So in terms of the services that Rebecca was mentioning, we offer those, and there are several other organizations based out of Manhattan. Salina is Homestead Ministries. Wichita has Center for Combating Human Trafficking and Raise Her Head. So there are resources that have been developed and are working to expand. And now we have this virtual world that allows us to be able to provide education even further out than just in our local community. And we also have a buyer's education program that is based off of a very promising practice based out of Washington. We have a webinar that we did last month that featured that program. It's called Stopping Sexual Exploitation, a program for men. And that class is up and running and also can be attended virtually as well as in person.
Thank you, Lucy. That's fantastic. Rebecca, thank you. If you have questions for Rebecca, put them in the chat. We'll hopefully swing back around when we open the floor for Q&A. But Rebecca, thank you for all that you're doing and for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So next up, I would like to welcome Christine Raino to the table. Christine is the Senior Director of Public Policy at Shared Hope International. Fun fact, Linda Smith, Shared Hope's founder, and myself, we kicked that off together years ago in Virginia. So it's been, we're a big fan is what I'm trying to say of all that Shared Hope has done and is doing. Can't wait for you to hear from Christine. So Christine, if you'll introduce yourself, share a bit about Shared Hope, what you're seeing in the way of challenges and successes when it comes to reforms nationally and especially in Kansas, and what folks in Kansas can do to support that work. Welcome.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much, Ashley. I really appreciate the opportunity, and Lucy too. I appreciate the opportunity to join this discussion today. As I think mentioned earlier, I'm Senior Director of Public Policy at Shared Hope International. This is a topic that Shared Hope has spent a lot of time on through our state report cards project. And actually, Kansas in particular is a state that has done a lot of work on its state's laws over the years. As I'll kind of talk more about today, Kansas, like the rest of the country, still has work to do on some important legislative changes that are really needed to move the state toward more survivor-centered responses to child and youth sex trafficking. We actually started, so Shared Hope started looking at Kansas's laws in 2011, and that was when we first released the very first state report cards under our Protected Innocence Challenge framework. And at that time, and this was looking at, we were analyzing the laws of all 50 states and the District of Columbia on the strength of the laws addressing child sex trafficking. And under that, in that first report card in 2011, Kansas received an F grade and a score of 50.5. Now, Kansas wasn't alone. More than half the country was failing in 2011. So we have really seen some tremendous progress. And actually, in the intervening years, Kansas increasingly shifted its attention to the issue of child sex trafficking and began passing bills that fix those gaps in its laws. And we saw that progress show in Kansas's grades. In 2013, Kansas's grade jumped to a C. In 2015 to a B, and by 2019, when we released the last report cards that were released under the Protected Innocence Challenge, Kansas had raised its grade to an A and raised its score to a 93.5. So that was a really tremendous progress. And Kansas is also one of only 6 states that raised their grade from an F to an A in the 9 years of the Protected Innocence Challenge report cards. And it was really exciting to see Kansas's commitment to improving its legal framework and to see the legislature each year work on improvements to the laws that address child sex trafficking in Kansas. But what we also saw was that Kansas's progress and the way Kansas progressed from an F to an A also reflected a trend that we were seeing across the country. What we were seeing was that there was disparate progress between the areas of the Protected Innocence Challenge framework that focused on criminal provisions and the section of the framework that focused on victim protections. So despite 9 years of overall progress across the country, we continued to see a lag in progress on policies addressing survivor-centered reforms and protections. In particular, what we saw was a conflict arising in the development of criminal laws that clarified that a commercially sexually exploited child is a victim of trafficking, and that commercial sexual exploitation of a child is the crime of sex trafficking, child sex trafficking. And yet laws remain in place to criminalize that child for that very same exploitation. This continues to be a gap in Kansas's law and actually almost 20 other states as well. And really, this was one of the advantages of monitoring this development of state laws over several years and seeing all of this progress. States, as I said, most of the country was failing in 2011. By 2019, most states had A's or B's. We only had 2 D states. So a lot of progress that we saw from 2011 to 2019. But one of the things that seeing all that progress allowed us to also see was what the areas were where gaps were persisting. And so as we continued to see a divergence in states' progress, within the national average went up to went from failing in 2011 to a mid-B range in 2019. Victim protection scores went from also failing in 2011 but to just a low C range in 2019. And what we recognized in seeing that disparate growth was that achieving an A grade under the existing framework was not going to be an endpoint for states, but instead it really needed to be a starting point, and that the progress that states were making under the Protected Innocence Challenge framework needed to become the foundation for the next level of survivor-centered legislative reforms. So with this, we actually decided after almost 10 years of grading states under the Protected Innocence Challenge, we released the last report cards under the framework in 2019, and then we released a new framework in 2020. And we will be using that framework going forward to grade states. And those new report cards will be released November 17th. So the advanced framework that we released last November 2020 was actually, we actually started developing that a few years ago. And the development of that framework was shaped by extensive stakeholder input and feedback. We convened stakeholder work groups, conducted a national survey, and then also our direct work with legislators and advocates over the years brought us considerable information as we provided technical assistance on changing the laws consistent with the Protected Innocence Challenge. And the meetings we had with stakeholders really focused on the challenges and successes that stakeholders were seeing with legislative changes in their states, as well as what they really saw was needed to keep things moving forward and to keep progressing in responses to child sex trafficking victims. And as we developed the new framework, we really wanted to look down the road and not just think about, we wanted to really think about where was the country going to be in several years, not just a year or two from now, or where could we be? So just like the Protected Innocence Challenge framework was in 2011, the advanced legislative framework is aspirational. We don't expect states to have A's and B's right out of the gate. We are, mainly because we are drilling down directly to the areas where the states already had gaps. And overall, since we saw so much progress that states made in improving criminal laws over the years, and this progress was needed in 2010 when the framework was developed, many states didn't specifically criminalize child sex trafficking, didn't hold buyers of sex with children accountable, or really even identify their role in the crime of child sex trafficking. And there were a number of just gaps that allowed trafficking perpetrators to avoid criminal liability. And the framework, while we've now refocused the framework on gaps that remain in victim protections, we will still focus on some key gaps in criminal laws that do still potentially allow perpetrators to evade criminal liability. But overall, the shift is to really focus on those areas of victim protections where states were lagging behind under the old framework. And so the new advanced framework is very much a new start. It will reflect the next level of progress on legislative reforms. And some of the differences under the new advanced framework include expanded non-criminalization for child sex trafficking victims. So not directing child trafficking victims into punitive systems, including not going into juvenile justice to access services, but receiving a protective service-based response. And so what goes along with that is the improved access to services. And again, not just as an immediate response, but as an ongoing continuum of care to meet the many needs that child sex trafficking victims have. And ensuring, right now, the idea of ensuring access to services through a non-punitive process was captured in the Protected Innocence Challenge framework. But now under the advanced legislative framework, many other policy goals will actually orbit around this central priority. Another change in the framework is that the advanced framework looks at long-term commitment and buy-in. A key need that was identified in our outreach when we conducted outreach to state stakeholders was the need for funding to ensure that there is a framework there for responding to survivors with supportive services rather than criminalization. So funding for supporting agencies and community-based organizations and providing access to services for child sex trafficking victims is now incorporated into the advanced framework. Additionally, prevention is woven throughout the advanced framework, and a new extra credit provisions also allow us to look at issues that we had not addressed previously. Specifically, we're looking at pushing the bright line past 18 to promote protections for youth, and that's addressed as extra credit. Similarly, recognizing the intersection between labor and sex trafficking is also addressed through extra credit. And so what does this mean for Kansas? For Kansas, and just to sort of clarify, right now what this means for Kansas is sort of looking forward. And I think something that's important to remember is that Kansas's past progress was not accomplished in one bill. It took years of commitment and keeping this issue as a priority to bring Kansas from an F to an A. So really, by continually working to keep improving its laws, Kansas became one of the top 10 states in the country under the Protected Innocence Challenge, despite starting as an F state. And I think with that same commitment under the new framework, Kansas can tackle the gaps that remain in its laws. And we're really looking forward to seeing that ongoing progress. And again, since we will be releasing the report cards, I don't have Kansas's current grade, but that will actually be released on November 17th. So as we're looking at the old report card under 2019, but then really looking to forward at this new advanced framework. The new advanced framework is really sort of setting a new roadmap for Kansas to move forward. And honestly, the advanced framework would not be possible if it wasn't building on the tremendous work that's already been done at the state level. If we had not seen states commit to ongoing sustainable change, to listening to survivors, and really believing that we can all do better to improve responses to child sex trafficking victims, we could not have moved forward with such an aspirational framework. We set the bar higher because we believe states are ready for a new challenge. And we're looking forward to Kansas taking on that challenge too.
Thank you so much, Christine. We sincerely appreciate all of that amazing work. I mean, I hope, for those of you who don't know, Shared Hope pioneered kind of grading states across the union in that kind of original moment, right, in 2010, when really the U.S. finally woke up to the fact that human trafficking was happening within our borders, and that it wasn't just foreign nationals who were being trafficked across our borders for labor and sexual exploitation, although that is absolutely happening. What was happening also, and maybe even more so, is the exploitation of our own children and youth and adults across our country. So thank you so much. Christine, we have both, I would say, active legislators on this call, as well as concerned citizens. If you could pick one call to action, I know that's tough, but one call to action for each, what is it that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think I appreciate that question. One of the things that a lot of that really, as I said, sort of the central priority that the framework will really center around and build on is the need to really provide a protective, non-punitive response to child sex trafficking victims, to really connect our laws and our responses with the idea that a child who has been exploited through commercial sex should not be criminalized, but really needs access to services and a protective, not a coercive response. So that is the really key thing that is really at the heart of a lot of the changes to the framework.
Yeah. So then I'll rephrase that and say it this way, I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. So for those of you who are driving legislative changes, laws and policies and systems changes, that the call to action for you on this is to see where are we still doing that in the state of Kansas? Where might minors or even young adults or adults for that matter, who, and you just heard that from Rebecca, who should be treated as victims of the exploitation that they are experiencing instead of perpetrators for sure, or somehow criminals because of the way our laws and systems are structured. So we're going to encourage you to take a look at those report cards that come out, find ways, to build on that. And if you're someone in the community who's not directly involved in those shifts and changes, first of all, make sure you call those who are, that you have connections to, and really impress upon them the importance of that. But second is, it's the implementation of laws that sometimes becomes the big gap. So we can create great laws, great frameworks, great policies, but if there are not enough resources and services have the support that they need to actually implement those laws and policies, well, then it doesn't happen. So as citizens of our communities, I'm greatly encouraging you to find ways to lean in alongside, come alongside all those who are in a position to, if that law shifts and changes, and as it does, they'll be on the receiving end of trying to provide those services and empower survivors and set up those pathways to success, and they're going to need your support. Lucy,
Ashley, oh, I'm sorry, Ashley. I just wanted to add one additional, and actually I'll add it to the chat. I have a even more concrete call to action, which is that we have a campaign. Anyone can sign up to receive their report card on the day it's released on 17th. So I will add that link to the chat.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Christine. We can't wait. Lucy, now, as Christine shared, Kansas went from an F status to an A status in about 9 years. And Lucy, I know that a lot of that, it was a team effort, but you were there for a lot of that, wearing the hat of driving a lot of that in the government. And you've worn a lot of hats in the state of Kansas too, as a survivor advocacy efforts, direct service provider, worked the governor's office. So I think you must have thoughts, maybe some context that you might want to share about that journey or where you'd like to see this go next. So I really want to pass the baton to you to kind of fill that in.
Yeah, as we were having a discussion, and Faron may share this in his portion, but we were having a discussion when we were preparing for today about how many of our state level elected officials this year, the majority are new. And Faron was mentioning that, in fact, only 27 have been there since 2012, when Kansas really started digging in on providing specialized services for survivors of commercial sexual exploitation, and with an emphasis on those who are still minors. And I think that's why we have folks from the Attorney General's Office, Victim Services, Michelle McCormick is on this call today, and the folks from Department for Children and Families that are on this call today. We don't want any of the good work that's been started to come to a screeching halt unintentionally, right? Because of a lack of awareness and knowledge. So I think that's why it was so important to me personally that we have this conversation today, that we have it now as our elected legislators are preparing to move to Topeka. When I was working at the state and we would see the new legislators come in, and those of you who are on the call who have served, and like their very first day, they're greeted with about 14,000 pieces of paper of all of the priority things, to handle. And so as we look at advocating for the most marginalized, the most vulnerable in our communities, who have a tendency to be considered the least cooperative with some of our systems, especially when they're being criminalized. This is still a very, very urgent priority that we not lose any traction, that we continue the way forward. There have been discussions in our Human Trafficking Advisory Board meetings about continuing this way forward, even as our government and attorney general seats are moving too, right? And it is us as the citizens and the advocates that are in this work, and sitting in seats that are not so movable, right? That we have the opportunity to carry forward that influence and to keep it on the forefront of our discussions. So I invite you, go to the meetings where our legislators are hosting town hall meetings and raise these concerns. Call them, have coffee with them, send them emails, which I know you all, I'm sorry for just saying that because I know you get about 2,000 emails every hour, but it is so important that we do continue to have the conversation, or this can get lost. And those who are suffering, the numbers are increasing as this pandemic prolongs, and as everything else, right, that impacts those that are vulnerable being exploited. As long as that endures, it's going to be so important for us to continue to make sure that these are priority conversations. And I do thank Shared Hope for being a long-term standing partner with with survivor leadership in our state, but a longstanding partner with our leadership. And so they are a resource, as is World Without Exploitation and National Center on Commercial Sexual Exploitation and all of the others, and even Rotary, who is hosting this today. We're very concerned that this does remain a priority and something that will be addressed.
I love that, Lucy. So I think that, we'll circle back with any questions you have. If you have questions for Christine, please put them in the chat. Christine, thank you so much for all you're doing and for sharing with us today. We'll probably open the floor again and see your face in a moment. So thank you so much. So follow that link that Christine has put in the chat so that you can get the report card. The other thing that Lucy and I and others will be working, if you are in the Kansas legislature, then we're working not to create a 14,000 page. I promise it'll be one. It might be front and back, but we're going to be handing that to you later this year, or at least by January, which is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month, giving you a bit of that historical context for the great progress that Kansas has made, and then some places we still need to go, so that you can really zone in there. And my caution is this: often we work with states who have new legislators who become very passionate about this cause, and rightly so, but they don't know that history. They don't know the well, that's behind the reforms that have already taken place. And so sometimes creating a new law, a new bill, promoting a new bill might actually undo, it may create harm for previous progress unless we're seeing the whole picture. So that's our goal by giving that picture to you all very soon. But in the meantime, if you're pressing forward, then just know that Lucy at Veronica's Voice, Shared Hope, World Without Exploitation, and others are there to be your guide and to support you in that. So speaking of places where we've been and where we want to go still, I would like to welcome Faron Barr, who is played multiple hats of reform efforts in the community, most recently with Rotary, and he'll be sharing his personal passion area for this and things that they're working on today. So welcome, Faron, and we'll pass the baton to you.
Thank you, Ashley. Happy to be here. And I wanted to start off, of course, I'm the immediate past district governor with District 5710, which is Northeast Kansas. I also have contact with our neighboring district and their leaders. And we figured that we could combine our efforts with both districts and affect the entire state through several different efforts. But to kind of put this in context of why Rotary is even involved, several years ago, we had an international convention in Atlanta, and Rebecca Bender, who some of you on this call know, have heard of, and Ashton Kirchner were talking about human trafficking at this international conference. Well, this really sparked a lot of interest in American Rotarians and a lot of other Rotarians worldwide. We are 1.2 million strong and have one of the strongest networks of any NGO on the planet. So we were trying to figure out ways in which we could help eradicate human trafficking through these efforts. In 2019, me and a few other Rotarians attended a presentation by the Attorney General's office talking about human trafficking in Kansas, and the problem and how it was right where we are. And we decided at that point, we're going to have to do something about this. We can't just let this go by without Rotary having some kind of impact. So we did. We first of all couldn't figure out, well, how does Rotary get involved? So we met with the Attorney General's office, and we found out we can be involved in a lot of ways. We can help through victim aid, of course, and raising money to help with that. We can also help with the awareness and trying to diminish demand through awareness. Early childhood education is something that has come up here recently. And then, of course, we can advocate for legislation that promotes human rights. So with that, that's why we are now in this district very supercharged about this cause of eradicating human trafficking. The good things that Kansas has been doing, you've heard a little bit about that. one of the reasons we went from an F to an A is that we enacted a law back in, I think it's 2014 or 15, that really did help with decriminalizing children who have been subjected to human trafficking. If you are under 18, you will be a victim from human trafficking and not tried as a prostitute. If you are over 18, if you identify as a victim, you will get that same treatment, that you will be treated as a victim, not as a prostitute. Another thing that they changed in that same law, I believe, is they changed the word from prostitution to sexual relations. And I know Lucy is really big on changing sexual relations to commercial sex acts, because commercial sex acts is exactly what it is. And that's what we would like to see in that legislation. Another thing that has been really good that Kansas has done is that we have just recently we enacted a law that has mandatory posting in places like convenience stores, gas stations, and other areas that might see some pretty heavy traffic, for giving people the national hotline for human trafficking, so that if people see something that they think is suspicious, then they can call and report what they've seen. And there are several other states that have that posting mandatory. For Kansas, for a long time, it's been recommended, but not mandatory, but now it is. And one of the ways in which Rotary can help with this, which I've already got the consent from both current district governors of the 2 districts in this state, is that Rotary can help get those posters out to the businesses that they would be going into. The Attorney General's office is still working on the exact rollout for that and some of the talking points. So we're waiting for them to finish with that, and then we'll move along. One of the things that's been really important for us is to make sure that we are collaborating with the Attorney General's office and any other state agencies that we need to be collaborating with, so that we're not working against each other, but with each other. That's very, very important. This state has a human trafficking advisory board, and we have been working with them as much as we possibly can. So that's the good things that's been going on in this state, but there are some things that we definitely need to improve on. One of them is that we are one of 4 states in the entire United States that does not have any licensure whatsoever of massage therapists. And that is that particular bill has come up several times and has never really even made it out of committee. And there's a report that came out in December of 2019 that stated that we have 75 suspected illicit massage businesses in this state. And that was in 2019. And I can tell you this much: go online, Google Kansas illicit massage therapists or massage parlors, and you'll get hundreds and hundreds of accounts of things that's been happening in Kansas. That did not pass this last time, and in 2019 we had a pretty good push going, and then last year it didn't make it either. And main reason for that was we have 15 different municipalities in this state that have city ordinances that are pretty good, and they don't want to be preempted by a state law, which is understandable. So we will probably have to take a couple of steps back and talk to the League of Municipalities and see how we can possibly get them involved in something that could be more broad for the state. We've also, the Judicial Council has been studying to see if we can do things to, once again, help victims with their records, their legal records, things like vacatur and expungement, for example. But the revisers weren't happy with some of the wording on that, so that's still in the works. Of course, victim services improvement is something we certainly need to work on. We do not have near enough staff secure facilities in this state, especially for long-term care, for reintegration. We need to work on that, and that's probably going to be funding for that, but that's another piece that's definitely lacking in this state. There's not enough beds. We also need to work with the Attorney General's office and, of course, DCF to determine what the highest priorities are. We also have seen this come up a few times. Well, it has come up in the last year or two to curb the demand by increasing buying penalties. So that would mean for buyers, if you're a first-time buyer, right now, that is a misdemeanor. The penalty for first-time buying is no worse than being caught in possession of marijuana. So it's a very, very low-level misdemeanor. We would like to see that up to a level 9 felony, which is the lowest level of felony, and probably would not see jail time, but would at least put a felony on your record. And we would expect that someone who could afford to be a buyer probably would not want that there, and could be an avoidance for them. As far as the next thing on the list here is early childhood education. This is something that's come up for our district here recently. We did see something very successful happening out in California, and I'll speak to that in a second, but early childhood education is something we feel that really needs to be happening in this state. And some schools are doing that already, but not all. And it is something that we have seen in some states. Well, actually, California is the first state, I think, to make it mandatory for school personnel and students to have some education on human trafficking and what it is, what it looks like. And of course, that would have to be age appropriate for those students. But at this point, we're just looking at working with the Attorney General's office, the Kansas Department of Education, and the State Board of Education to try to see where we can get more education in the schools so that these students are educated about this before they ever get approached by someone who might be a trafficker. Some of the state laws that we've looked at, which has been very helpful. Now, as Rebecca said, the culture in different states varies a lot. So we obviously understand that, but we've looked at the Minnesota Safe Harbor Law, which is pretty good. Then we've also looked at one that is pretty much a landmark type of legislation in Texas. It has made the first time buying a state jail felony. Now, those of you in all of us in Kansas may not know what a state jail felony is. That is the lowest level of felony you can get in Texas. But if you are a repeat offender in Texas, it is a 3rd-degree felony. If you are and if it's with a child, it's a 2nd-degree felony. So that is one of the harshest laws we've seen in the entire nation. And that just got passed just this last year. And then the other one that I mentioned was the California education law, and that was AB 1227 if you wanted to look it up. But it made it mandatory for school personnel and students to have education every year in the grades 7 through 12. So that was very big. One of the things we've also found is data collection is lacking here in this state. We are not getting good numbers, good data to work with. We feel like there's probably more victims than what we see. And there needs to be a center data collection point that will need to be law for it to actually be effective. Privacy is an issue there, but we know that we could be collecting sterilized data As far as call to action is concerned, an election is coming up, and there's going to be 125 different representatives that are going to come up for election. There are committees that we can inform on human trafficking in the state of Kansas. Those committees that have surfaced to the top as far as being very poignant with this is children and seniors, federal and state, and public health and welfare. One of the ways that you can really help here is if you can talk to your legislators, if they are on that committee, or you can actually, if we can get in front of a committee and testify in front of a legislative committee, that would be even better. And I do want to thank, before I wrap up here, I do want to thank Jennifer Montgomery and John Calvert. Jennifer Montgomery is with the Attorney General's office, and John Calvert is with the Kansas Department of Education. Both of them have done a lot of speaking in front of education groups to try to get the word out at middle school, high school, but we need to help them, and we certainly can.
Thank you, Faron. That's amazing amount of work and information, and just some good takeaway talking points and calls to action there. So thank you so much. One thing I want to really highlight about what Faron has been sharing is there are so many ways that things can be reformed and need to be reformed. If you were picking up on it, Faron was just sharing sort of a whole popcorn, range of reforms that were needed to help prevent human trafficking, reforms that have been put into place to help increase identifications of trafficking victims, like posting the National Human Trafficking Hotline and local hotlines in businesses that are front-facing, to rescue and exit efforts, restoration efforts, and the whole framework there. So when we're thinking about what needs to change in Kansas, or what are ways we can engage in those reforms, think about that whole picture. So from prevention, identification, exit, restoration, reforms, all of it, for really everyone, for adults and children, for nationals and citizens, labor and sex trafficking. And so Faron, thank you so much for your leadership in all of these ways. I can't wait to unpack that more. And we're so thankful for Rotary's just leadership and stewardship of all of this work. So bravo, slow clapping you, sir. And can't wait to just keep moving that ball forward. We're closing in on our hour, and so I want to be mindful of our time. But if you are listening in and you're kind of thinking, okay, I really obviously need to understand this world of human trafficking a little bit better. I would like to understand better just all the pieces of the puzzle that need to be active in our state to combat this well, and then how you are uniquely positioned to engage, then I'm going to encourage you, and Rotary is scholarshiping anyone in Kansas who wants to do this. So go to learnwithjusticeu.com and take the Learn How to End Human Trafficking series there. You'll earn 3 badges, digital certifications, etc. But it's going to walk you through how all of that works. And when you do, put Rotary Swarm as the coupon code, and it'll zero out the cost for you, and you can be on your way to learn so much more about this topic and what you need to know and how to make a difference. We also have courses there, because it's come up several times today, on CSEC. And these are brand new courses about how educators, behavioral therapists, case managers, foster families, etc., are interacting with this issue of commercial sexual exploitation of children, commonly referred to as child sex trafficking, and what you can do to impact that issue in all of the ways and all the hats that you wear in your community too. So go online, learn more, take some time, sign up for the Shared Hope International report card that's about to come out. Continue to follow World Without Exploitation and just all of our speakers today and the work that they're doing, and just see yourself as part of the solution. So today we hope that you learn tons, but you are walking away with some action items, and we're going to look forward to supporting that in the days and months ahead. Lucy, I'll pass it back to you to close us out today.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Again, I'm going to try to add myself to spotlight here. But one of the things I want to make sure you're all aware of, you can find this information at veronicasvoice.org/Rotary-Swarm, but I'll also put it in the email to you all. Justice University is an amazing opportunity for you to learn more about this topic and to feel like you know how to converse about it, because you'll have a shared common language if you not only take it yourself, but invite your friends to do so as well. We recommend our legislators to take this course as well. It'll take you 3 to 4 hours to complete. There is a fee for it that has been covered by this global grant. So we have still 200 left. Yes, we have people that have already started taking. We've had about 50 people take it, but we still have 200 of these vouchers available. And so we want to get that out in the community and give all of you in leadership an opportunity to complete that course. So we'll send that an email as well. Yeah, so thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and hit record off, and then we can kind of